Alright, here we go. Welcome everyone, my name is PZPat, and I've been playing Kerbal Space Program. I think I got it right when it became available on Steam. I'm pretty sure that's when I got it. I played it a lot when I first got it, like probably an unhealthy amount. And one thing I've noticed, I haven't been active in posting on the forums or in the subreddit, but I'm always lurking there. I'm always looking at the posts, and one thing I've noticed is that there's a lot of people out there that, even though they've had the game for a long time, and I see this all the time, especially on Reddit, is that there's a lot of people that have been playing the game for a pretty long period of time and are still not able to get to an orbit. And that's what we're going to do here today. We're going to teach you the very basics of Kerbal Space Program. And the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to build a ship. And then we are going to get into orbit. And we're also going to actually deorbit it and bring it back down to Kerbal, or Kerbin, rather. So that's today's lesson. It's the goal of the lesson. And I've got a little lesson out planned. If I'm looking off to the side, I've got 3 monitors. I've got one with my stream control and with my little lesson guide, and then I've got, of course, the actual game on my center screen. So that's a little bit about me and a little bit about what we're going to learn today. So what I'm going to do first is I started a save file for this, and I'm going to build a new ship. And I probably should show the Space Center while I'm here. For those that are brand new to Kerbal Space Program, this is the Space Center. I love this place. This is where you select what you're going to do, basically. This is one of the more recent additions, is the Science Center. I'm in sandbox mode, so you can't do it, but basically that's where you use your research points, or your science points, to unlock new equipment. You have your astronaut training facility right here. This is where you can hire your new Kerbal. Right now, I've got good old classic Jebediah, Bill, and Bob Kerman. You have your tracking center. And this is actually, I don't have any flights out there right now, but this is where you would be able to see any and all of your current and ongoing flights you have. This is the landing strip. Now, one thing that even I've noticed a lot of veterans don't even notice is that you can actually click on your launch pad, which is here, or your landing strip, and you can actually start with particular ships. So if you have something loaded, you can click on it, choose the crew you want to man it, and then actually launch it right from there. You don't actually need to go into the VAB or the spaceplane hangar. So this is the the spaceplane hangar. That's where you build space planes, and this is the VAB, the vertical assembly building. And that's what we're going to be using today to build our ship. So in here, controls are pretty simple. I'm going to kind of brush over them. I'm not going to go too much into controls, mostly because it's all very easily available on the website, in the Wikipedia entry for the VAB controls. So I'll kind of brush over some of the important ones, mainly movement. But first and foremost, in here we don't have anything right now. We have no spaceship, no pods, no nothing. So we can't do anything. We can't move around in the screen. We can't zoom in or out, anything like that. So first things first, we need to have a starting point. You technically, since one of the later updates, you can actually start with some different parts. I still recommend starting with a pod, because you're going to build your ship around your crew, or maybe unmanned vessel. Today we're going to build a one-man ship. So we're going to go, like I said, our mission is to get into orbit, make an orbit, and then come right back down. So we're going to use that one Kerbal. There's different types, like I was pointing out earlier. We want a man pod. Now there's different ones. Some can support up to 3 crew. We only need 1. So this Command Pod Mark 1 is perfect. It's small, it's lightweight, and it's got enough space for 1 Kerbal. So we're going to click on it, and it will immediately bring it to the center of our VAB. Now pods are a little bit different from other parts. The reason being is that your view is focused around the center of the pod at all times, for the most part. Now I'm using my mouse wheel to move up and down the VAB. And I'll say more likely my ship is going to be taller than what we see here. So I'm going to actually move my pod a little bit higher so I can build around it. I'm going to click on it, scroll up a little bit, and then click again to drop it. You can place it really anywhere you want, but... So now, like I said, the first thing we got to remember is that we're going to be coming back down to Kerbal. So the idea is that the only thing that I want landing is the pod and the Kerbal knot. You can make more advanced landers that have engines on them, and we'll go into that in a later lesson some other time. But for now, we're just landing the pod only, and the Kerbal knot inside, obviously. So to do that, we need to be able to separate that pod from the rest of our ship. All the parts are up here, and these are the different tabs. Now what we want to be able to do, like I said, is separate. So that's going to be in our structural tab. And there's a whole bunch of different parts in here. It's confusing, but we're going to go to the next page, and we're looking for a decoupler. So it's a stack decoupler this size. Now they have different sizes. Like that's a really small one. That's a really big one. That's really thin. But we're going to be using the medium size because that's just what this particular pod needs. So as you see, you've got those little green bubbles. You basically click those together. And at that point, I'm now able to separate the pod from whatever else I build below it. Another important thing is we need to be able to get back down safely. You can't just free fall unless you want to die. So we need to add a parachute. So in the Utilities tab, once again, a whole bunch of different parts in here, but we want parachutes. There's different types of parachutes. We've got really big ones. We've got small ones. We've got side-mounted ones that you can actually mount on the side of your craft. But we're going to be using just this one small one right here, which is the Mark 16, in case you're interested. So just like placing the decoupler, you can't really see it. There we go. You can kind of see that little green bubble there. It's a little covered up, but you basically click it on. There we go. We can now land this thing, believe it or not. We just need to get it somewhere. So the next step is we need to have a stage that I'm basically going to use to make our orbit more even, or to circularize it is the term. I'm also going to use this stage to slow down, so that way when it's time to come back down to Kerbal, I can slow down, and that will make my orbit decay and bring me back into the atmosphere. We don't need a huge engine for that. We don't need a big fuel tank for that. So we're going to use, under the propulsion tab, we're going to use this kind of medium-sized fuel tank, I'll call it. Now, like I said, there's all sorts of different sizes. You can go crazy with how big or even how small you want your fuel tank to be. But we're going to be using this particular one for this stage. Fuel doesn't get you anywhere. You need an engine. Once again, all types of engines out there. And we're going to be kind of looking more for an efficient small engine. We don't need a lot of power, because we're already in space. We've already got the hard part out and done with. So we're going to go ahead and use the LV909. It's a small engine. It's very efficient, however, so it's great for doing what we're going to be doing. It's just circularizing our orbit. I also use it for interplanetary burns if I'm not really too fond of using nuclear engines, but that's for another lesson. So once again, this is starting to look like a ship now. We've got an engine and a fuel tank and everything like that, but that's really not enough to get us off the ground and into orbit. So we need to add another stage. So we're going to go back to our structural tab, and we're going to add another decoupler. Believe it or not, you actually can add a decoupler right beneath an engine. If you watch, once I put it on, it adds a little shroud around it. Now, I'm going to add another fuel tank, and this one's going to be bigger, because this is going to be kind of our main stage. That's going to be getting us up to the outer atmosphere and into space. So we need a big engine, a big fuel tank. And we're going to use, there's two different engines that I could kind of use for this particular stage. You have your LVT-30 and your LVT-45. They have very similar power ratings. The LVT-30 has slightly more power. I, however, do like to use the 45, and the reason being is it has, if you look at the stats, I can't like mouse over it unfortunately, but if you look at the stats, it has a vectoring range. Basically that means it can turn, the engine can turn a lot more reliably by itself. So it just kind of gives you, sacrifices some of your power for a little maneuverability. I like having the maneuverability. So we're going to use that. That was a T-45, yeah, the T-45. Believe it or not, this is not enough to get us to orbit. I could launch this and we probably get up to, oh, I don't know, probably 50,000 meters before we started to fall, maybe 60,000. So we're going to add another little step here. We're going to add some solid rocket boosters to our ship. And to do that, we're going to add radial decouplers. And these little guys, you can stick them on the side, and you can attach other parts to them. I'm actually going to use the symmetry mode here. You can click on this as many times as you want, so you get up to 8. But we're going to actually just use 4. 4 is overkill, quite honestly, but we're going to use 4. As you see, it places 4 in the same fashion around the rest of your ship. So go ahead and put down those. And we're going to use our small solid rocket boosters. Thing about solid engines you need to keep in mind is that you can't shut them down. Once they're burning, they burn until they're empty of fuel. So you can't just decide halfway through a burn, you're like, oh, I've got enough speed, I'm going to go ahead and stop. You have to either let them burn out or separate them from your ship. And speaking from experience, it's usually not a good idea to separate them from your ship if they're still burning, because more often than not, they'll just run into the front of your ship and blow it up. So we're going to place it on top. Now, it's kind of tricky to do sometimes, but you want to make sure you put it right in the center of those little decouplers. This is a good time to talk about staging, I think, here. And you noticed I was placing parts. You kind of may have seen on the right side this little orange bars with different icons popping up. These are the stages. For the most part, this was actually pretty straightforward. It actually did the staging correctly for me, it looks like, at first glance. And so basically, every time you press spacebar when you're actually launching, it will go to the next stage. So when I get outside on the launch pad and I press spacebar to launch, the first thing that's going to happen is it's going to fire my solid rocket engines. Now, in this case, let's say I really don't. Well, I do want to launch those first. So that's a bad example. Okay, let's do this. Once these rocket boosters are no longer useful to me, I want to break them off, and that's right here, those radial decouplers. But I want to engage my liquid fuel rocket at the exact same time, so that way there's no lag between power. So to do that, if you notice, I can mouse over the part, and it kind of highlights it in my stage, so I know which one it is. We're going to move my engine in that stage to the same stage that those decouplers are in. What that does is that it will decouple and start that engine at the exact same moment. Next thing is we're going to eventually want to separate the big engine, because that's going to run out of fuel, and we want to start up this center smaller engine. Well, same thing, we don't really need to wait at all between there, so we're going to actually go ahead and move that engine into that decoupler stage as well. So once that decoupler fires and removes the rest of that engine, the second engine will fire and we'll be rocking and rolling. So we actually have an orbit-capable ship right here, believe it or not. What we're going to do, though, is make it a little easier to handle, and we're going to put these launch stability enhancers on here. And the reason we do this is because, if you look, the lowest part of the ship is that liquid engine. It'll just try to balance on that, and it's going to wobble, and it might break. So we're just going to hold it up using these stability enhancers. And it adds a staging group. And if you look, there you go. See this? It didn't put that on there correctly. Well, it kind of did. I just don't like where it put it. Put all 4 of those stability enhancers right below the engines. We want the engines to start at the same time as the stability enhancers letting go, because you don't want to just drop down to the ground and blow up. Let's go ahead and name our ship. Lesson 1. Make it to space. Alright, so now like I said, we have a mission capable ship. We could save it. And what I'm going to do now is we're going to launch. So up here in these bars, the green button is our launch button. Once we hit that, it will take us out to the launch pad with the ship and the crew. Here we go. Look at that. We are set and ready for space travel. Now, a couple things I want to point out before I get into the sky is our throttle and staging, which I kind of brushed in the VAB while I was still building the ship. But while you're on the launch pad, if you happen to notice a mistake, you can actually fix it while you're on the launch pad. You can still rearrange your staging items if you desire to. It's all good though, so we don't need to worry about that. One thing that's important to remember is that if you're on the launch pad and you change something, it does not save. So like let's say you blow your ship up and you restart, you have to do it again to rearrange your staging again, unless you change it inside the VAB. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually throttle up, and to do that, I'm going to hold shift, and if you notice, this little bar here is kind of zooming up as I hold it down. Now the rocket engines, the solid rocket engines, don't matter with throttle. They're always on full bore all the time. But I want to have the throttle up so that way when those engines do break off and my liquid engine fires, it already has power and it's all set to go. So anyway, we're ready to launch, and the first thing I usually like to do is I like to turn on SAS. And basically that keeps your ship stable and pointed in the one direction that you're heading. To do that, you press T, and there's a little light here for that in your gimbal that shows you have it on. I'm flickering it right now so you can see where it's at. But we're all set. Jebediah is ready to launch. I'm ready to launch, and to do that, all we do is press spacebar. We're flying. So as we're flying, we're going to look at the gimbal, and I'm going to be switching around quite a bit to our map view. So if you see me switching out, I'm pressing M right now to go to my map view. And M again to come back to this. So I'm already noticing that my solid fuel cells are already starting to be depleted. I got to keep a very close eye on that. Once those things run out, I got to be on point and make sure I hit spacebar right away to switch. Right there. There we go. I think I had my mouse in there and it made it so I couldn't hit spacebar. So now we're on to our liquid engine. And I'm going to actually pause this just for a moment just to kind of show some stuff because it's going a little faster than I was expecting. This up here is kind of a very important piece of equipment you have here. This is how high you are actually. This is from sea level. And here's an important bar to look at that I've used quite a bit. And this is how dense the atmosphere is where you're at. Kerbin has an atmosphere, obviously. The moon, or the Mun, Minimus do not. But when you're on planets that have an atmosphere, it's important to keep an eye on that because the lower you are in the denser atmosphere, the harder it is to use your power to get to go somewhere. Because you have drag and all that other nonsense. But basically, if you look at it, that really light blue there, that's the densest atmosphere. As you go up, the atmosphere will get less and less dense. I usually start what's called a gravity turn right about here once we get into that second stage of atmosphere, that sky blue kind of color right there. And what a gravity turn is it points me in the direction that I need to go in order to start my orbit. So we're going to do that next. And if you look at your gimbal, I'm looking at that 90-degree line right there. It's kind of hard to see. But we're going to start turning. So to do that, I'm going to press D to start tilting over. And you don't want to tilt too much. I'm going to actually tilt about 45 degrees. And we're going to switch to our map view again. And this is kind of the pain, but you want to keep an eye on your apoapsis. Your apoapsis is essentially how high. That is the peak of your orbit. And I'm going to zoom in so I can get a better view of what's going on here. We're doing pretty good. This is kind of a steep approach, so I'm actually going to go ahead and tilt up just a little bit more. Now, Kerbin's atmosphere stops at 70,000 meters, or 70 kilometers. So we're going to basically stop this once I get it to about 75,000. There we go, right there. So I stop my burn by pressing X, by the way. That's like that kills your throttle. Now, we're still in the atmosphere, but we're still ascending. We still had plenty of speed. And I'm actually going to tilt to the horizon. Now, if you look at your gimbal, you have this the blue side and you have the orange side. The orange side is basically the ground. If you look at it that way, and that's the direction you're pointing. I want to be basically pointing almost directly at the horizon. A little bit above it is kind of a good spot. But once we get to pretty close to the peak, I'll start my burn once we're outside the atmosphere. And if you look, we're at 64,000 now, and the atmosphere is at 70. So we're going to start moving pretty quick here. And essentially, you point in the direction you have your orbit going, and you burn. And that will start circulating your orbit. So watch, the music will change. Right there. There we go. We're now outside the atmosphere. And I'm going to go ahead and turn my engine on. And we're going to burn the remaining fuel we have, which is not much. If you look, I'm still pointed. Okay, now we're going to switch to our other engine. There we go. I'm going to switch back to my map view so I can keep an eye on what's going on here. And it's slow, but you can see that our line is getting bigger. And it will eventually circularize us around the orbit of Kerbal. This is the long part. And you can do this faster if you have a stronger engine, but then you won't have as much fuel to play with. We're still going. You can technically launch into any orbit you want. Like I started at that 90-degree angle, like you saw. And that is the most efficient way because it's going at the same. It's going against the rotation of the Earth. Now, I'm actually cutting my engine because if you saw, my apoapsis was starting to get away from me a little bit. It's more efficient to burn when you're at your apoapsis if you're trying to increase your periapsis, which is the exact opposite of your orbit. But, all right, I'm going to go ahead and burn some more. Take a look. Let's take a look at our orbit. See, we're getting through. Look at that line. Oh, we're almost there. I'm going to stop burning again. Okay. There it is. Look at that. Just appeared. Now, like I said, the atmosphere on Kerbal is it starts at 70,000 meters. So our highest point of our orbit is, which I said is our apoapsis, is at 80,000, and our periapsis is at 23,000. Somewhere over here, we're going to enter the atmosphere again. And what happens there is that the atmosphere will slow us down and will actually decrease our apoapsis. And eventually it will decay. So this is essentially a decaying orbit. We will fall back to the surface. So we want to keep bringing that out. And to do that, we just keep burning like we have been at our apoapsis. I'm going to burn a little bit longer, and we got to get that periapsis above 70,000. Oh, look at that. Perfect. All right. So right now we have a good stable orbit. We will not fall to the planet's surface. Now, one thing you'll hear a lot of people talk about is circularizing their orbit. It is dang near impossible to have a perfectly circular orbit. I've just screwing around. I've done it to the point where I've got them within about 4 or 5 meters. That's about as close as I can get. But this is fairly circular. I mean, we're off by 10,000 meters. I'll burn a little bit more to increase that. So look, we're at 80,000 on this side and 76 on this. So we're, about 4,000, well, 5,000 because we're almost at 81. I'm going to keep burning. There we go. 80.9, 80.2. That's pretty darn close. Any closer than that is really, there's no point in that. Alright, so now we are in orbit. That is the first point of this lesson done, and now I'm going to go over some terms. I brushed on them real quick. But I talked about apoapsis and periapsis. Now every orbit has those 2 points. Like I said, you have your lowest point in your orbit and your highest point in your orbit. If you want to increase your periapsis, you need to burn prograde at your apoapsis. Now, prograde is just a fancy way of saying the direction you're currently traveling. If you look on your gimbal, there's actually a symbol for it. There's this little yellow circle, and it's got 3 lines on the outside. It's kind of hard to see the lines because the white lines on the gimbal are covering them up a little bit, but trust me, there's some white lines or some yellow lines outside of that gimbal marker. That's the direction I'm facing. Retrograde is the exact opposite of that. So we're going to spin around. And look at that. Here's the retrograde marker. It looks pretty similar, but if you look closer, it's a yellow circle and it's got the 3 lines, and instead of being at the 12 o'clock position, 3 o'clock position, and 9 o'clock position, they're at about 3, maybe 3, 5, and 7 or so. So they're on the outside, they're just kind of at a more of a different angle. Now, like I said, those are kind of some of the basic terms you need to understand. Really, every orbit has an apoapsis and a periapsis. Even if you don't see your periapsis, you technically still have one. It just happens to be like in the center of the planet. So our next stage is actually getting back to Kerbin. Now, one thing I always try to keep in mind is that if you try to land on the dark side, it's a little harder. I like landing on the light side. So if I wanted to, I could actually slow down right now. I have enough fuel to do it. I could slow down and fall to the planet right around here. But I kind of want to try and shoot for the bright side over here. You can't always predict exactly where you're going to land unless you have, like some of the mods out there like MechJab. They can kind of calculate where you'll land. For the most part, I kind of have to do it by hand or by guesswork. So what we're going to do, though, just coincidentally, it's going to be right around our periapsis. I'm going to come to right about here, and I'm going to start doing a burn. And we're going to burn retrograde. So I'm going to go ahead and speed time up. To do that, I'm pushing down my period button. Also looks like the greater than or less than signs, the period and the comma. So if you look, I'm speeding up time. My ship is coming around. Coming around, coming around. We're coming from the dark side. See if you look how dark it is over here. We want to be on the light side. So we're going to keep burning time. And I don't really want to do a water landing either, so I want to try and land on the actual dirt versus the water. So here we are. Look at that. There's our ship. We're coming around still. I'm going to go ahead and burn. Wait a little longer. That should be sufficient. So now remember what I said about retrograde and prograde. Now, prograde is the direction we're moving currently. Retrograde is the opposite direction. So what we want to do is point in the opposite direction we're moving, which is retrograde. And there's my marker. I'm going to point right at it. And to slow down, it's really easy. You just turn on your engines and start burning. And what that does is it will slow you down. If you look on your gimbal, you have a speed indicator. We're going to use that to kind of get an idea of how fast we're moving. So I'm going to go ahead and start my burn right now. Throttle up. I'm turning on SAS just to keep myself pointed at that retrograde marker. It just makes it easier so I don't have to like manually correct little corrections and stuff like that. The SAS system will keep me on point. So while this is burning, we're going to switch back to our map view and take a look at what's happening. You can already see we're decaying down. Look at that. We're coming right down to the surface. And at this point, we are on a collision course with the planet. We are going to hit the surface, which is fine. We've planned for this. If you haven't planned for it, then you're going to kill your Kerbal. Sorry, man. So I'm just going to exhaust my fuel in this stage. There's no real reason not to. So as you can see, my number has gone down quite a bit. I was moving about, I think it was 2,000 meters a second, but now we're down to, just above 1,000. We're still slowing. And we're above the dirt. We're not above an ocean, so we are going to definitely hit the ground. And look at that. We're almost out of fuel. I'm still making some corrections to keep slowing me down. There we go. We're now out of fuel. This is all we got. Now, one of our last stages is to separate that engine and fuel tank from our pod. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And just to make it fun, I'm going to spin my ship around and see if I can fling it. And go. Alright, look at that. That's fun. So, as you can see, we've actually entered the atmosphere. One thing you'll notice is that your pod will kind of want to drift in its own direction. I'm trying to stop it from spinning. There we go. I'm going to actually put it right there. Normally, what ends up happening is your ship will kind of end up facing your retrograde, which is fine. And as we're getting into the denser atmosphere, you'll see that we should probably start catching on fire. I think we're moving fast enough. We might not be. But we're still descending, and I have one stage left. And that is my parachute stage. That's pretty important. I don't like to deploy my chute too early because it will slow you down too much, and it can take a long time to fall back to the surface. And here we go, we're entering some of the thicker atmosphere. If we're going to light up, this will be kind of where it's at. Oh, okay, I guess we are still traveling slow enough. Actually, we are accelerating again. I bet we might still catch on fire here. We're at 20,000 meters. Oh, there we go. I just want to wait and see if we actually got some cool heat effects because I like how that looks. All right, and at this point, the atmosphere is dense enough where it's actually slowing us down quite a bit. And I'm going to go ahead and deploy my parachute. There we go. And watch it slow, very rapidly slow me down. There we go. We are landing. And as we get a little closer, it's usually within about 1,000 meters of the ground. You'll actually, your chute will deploy even further and slow you down even faster because we're still moving pretty quick. This will kill us if we hit the ground at this speed. There we go. There we go. Yeah, it was about 1,000 meters from the ground. It deployed the chute, and it's going to slow us down to 6.8 meters a second. So we're really slow. And I don't want to sit around and wait, so I'm going to speed up time. Alright. 500 meters away. I'm going to go ahead and put time back to normal here. And there's our shadow. We are definitely close. Awesome. Alright, so we've landed successfully. We're going to recover the vessel. That's the last step, really. And to do that, you just kind of come up to the top of the screen, and there's a recover vessel that's now available. It's not available when you're in space, only once you've landed safely on Kerbal. And there we go. If you happen to have been doing some science missions, at this point you would have gotten some science points for recovering your vessel. We're not in science or the career mode, so you don't get to see that, but that is what you'll see. Anyway, that concludes today's lesson. I hope you all learned something. And hopefully I wasn't too annoying. But thanks for tuning in. I think I had a couple viewers there, not many, but hopefully you guys will find this useful, and I'll keep it on my Twitch account so you guys can see it later if you want to. Bye-bye.